"Could you cut my cake for me? I can't really. My hands don't listen anymore." She said it softly, almost apologetically, as if asking was the harder thing than the paralysis itself. Her eyes were fixed on the small birthday cake sitting on the break room table, white frosting, a single candle, and the number 27 written in pale blue letters that had already started to smudge. Around her, the hospital hallway hummed with the ordinary busyness of a Tuesday afternoon. Nurses moved past. Phones rang somewhere distant. And nobody stopped. Nobody except the old man in the gray janitor's uniform, pushing a mop cart near the door. He paused. Then he set the mop against the wall, walked to the sink, washed his hands carefully, the way a person does when they want to show respect through the act itself, and came to stand beside her wheelchair. "What flavor?" he asked, pulling out a plastic knife from the drawer. She blinked. "Vanilla." "Good choice," he said quietly. "Chocolate gets too emotional." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprises you, and something in the room shifted. Her name was Delilah Crane. 27 years old. A former physical therapist who had spent her career helping other people learn to move again, until a car accident 2 winters ago had stolen the fine motor control from her own hand. She still came to the rehabilitation center 3 days a week, not as a patient anymore, but as a volunteer advisor, because, as she once told her mother, sitting still made her feel like she was disappearing. She had requested the small birthday celebration herself, then immediately regretted it when she realized she'd forgotten she could no longer cut her own cake. The old man cut it with careful, even strokes. He placed the first slice on a paper plate and slid it gently to the edge of the table where she could reach it without struggling. He didn't make a performance of it. He didn't say, "Let me help you," or look at her with that particular expression, the one that arrived just before pity did. He simply cut the cake. "You've done this before," Delilah said, watching him. He glanced at her. "Done what?" "Been around someone who needed things done quietly." He was silent for a moment. "My wife," he said finally. "She had MS. Last few years, we learned to do most things quietly." He didn't say anything more. Neither did she. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, the way silences are when two people have both carried something heavy and recognized the weight in each other without needing to name it. His name, she would learn later, was Garrett Aldine. 61 years old. And he had been mopping floors at Suncrest Rehabilitation Center for 3 weeks. What Delilah did not know, what almost no one at Suncrest knew, was that Garrett Aldine was the father of Callum Aldine. Callum Aldine, 33, founder and CEO of Aldine Medical Group, the corporation that had acquired Suncrest 8 months ago and was currently in the process of restructuring it, a word that, in Callum's boardroom, meant cutting the community programs, the sliding scale patient fees, and half the support staff. Father and son had not spoken in 6 weeks. The fight had been the kind that doesn't announce itself as permanent until you're already standing in the wreckage. It had started over the restructuring plan. Garrett had read the proposal. Callum had left it open on a laptop during a family dinner, and he had said, very quietly, "These are real people, Cal. Not line items." Callum had said, just as quietly, "You don't understand how this works, Dad." And Garrett, who had spent 40 years working with his hands, in construction, in factories, later as a caretaker for Callum's mother, had looked at his son in his tailored suit and thought, "Maybe I don't. But I understand something you've forgotten." He had left that night. Not dramatically. He'd simply packed a bag, taken a room at a modest extended-stay motel, and the next morning walked into Suncrest and applied for the only open position, janitor, using only his first name and a cousin's address. He wanted to see, with his own eyes, what his son's decisions looked like from the inside. He had not expected Delilah Crane. Over the following 2 weeks, their paths crossed the way paths do in small buildings, at the coffee machine, near the elevator, Once in the garden courtyard where Delilah sat in the afternoon sun reading and Garrett swept the same patch of walkway 3 times without realizing it. She told him about her accident, about the grief of losing a career built entirely around her hand, about learning to find meaning in advising rather than doing. He told her about Elaine, his wife, gone 4 years now, and how grief had a way of making a person both softer and more stubborn at the same time. "You remind me of her," he said one afternoon. Not romantically, clearly, gently. The way an older person recognizes a spirit they've loved before in a different shape. Delilah looked at him. Was she stubborn too? Magnificently, he said. The day everything changed was a Thursday. Callum Aldine arrived at Suncrest unannounced. A site visit, his assistant had emailed the director, routine evaluation. He moved through the building with the careful efficiency of a man who had learned to look without seeing, cataloging spaces and costs with eyes trained by a decade of acquisition meetings. He was in the hallway outside the community room when he heard laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from somewhere unguarded. He stopped. Through the small window in the door, he saw a woman in a wheelchair and an old man in a gray uniform sitting across from each other at a table. The woman was trying to fold a piece of paper, origami it looked like, and failing, and laughing about the failing, and the old man was watching her with an expression Callum hadn't seen in years. It was the expression his father used to wear watching him as a child. His throat tightened before his mind caught up. He pushed open the door. Garrett looked up. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Delilah looked between them and understood, with the particular clarity that comes from spending time around both of them, exactly what she was witnessing. "Cal," Garrett said. Simply. "The way you say a name when it's been locked in your chest for weeks." Callum's voice, when it came, was stripped of the boardroom entirely. "Dad. What are you? How long have you been here?" "Long enough," Garrett said quietly, "to remember what I wanted you to understand." Callum sat down. Delilah started to excuse herself, but Garrett shook his head, "Stay," and she did. Callum looked around the room. At the handmade decorations on the walls. At the adapted equipment on the shelves. At Delilah, who met his eyes without flinching. "The programs you're cutting," she said, calm and steady, "this is what they look like. Not on a spreadsheet. Here." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I thought efficiency was the same as progress." Garrett reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over his son's. "Progress has to have a face, Cal. Otherwise it's just math." The restructuring plan was revised. Not abandoned, Callum was still a businessman, but reshaped with a community advisory board, preserved sliding scale services, and a foundation seeded with a portion of quarterly profits. It was not perfect, but it was human. Garrett went back to working with his hands, not as a janitor, but helping design the new accessibility renovations at Suncrest, where his practical knowledge mattered more than any consultant's report. And on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, a few months later, Delilah brought another small cake to the break room. Same white frosting. Same blue letters. This time, no number, just a word. "Thanks." She looked at Garrett. "Would you cut it again?" He smiled, warm, unhurried. "Every time you ask." Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can offer is not a solution. It is the willingness to sit down, be present, and do the quiet thing. Cut the cake, fold the paper, stay in the room. Kindness doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up, washes its hands, and begins. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.